There is a small, strange group of people walking among us right now, and most of them have no idea how rare they actually are. They are somewhere between 75 and 85 years old. They are not in nursing homes. They are not moving in slow, careful shuffles, terrified of the next fall. Many of them still climb stairs without holding the railing. Some still drive at night, still carry their own groceries, still argue with their grandchildren about politics at the dinner table with the same fire they had at 40. And when researchers who study aging finally sit these people down and ask them what they actually do, day after day, year after year, the answers are almost never what you would expect. It is not some rare pill. It is not a secret clinic in Switzerland. It is not a supplement stack that costs $400 a month. It is something far stranger, and honestly, a little uncomfortable to hear, because it means the excuse most of us reach for, "I am just getting old, there is nothing I can do," was never entirely true in the first place. Here is the part that tends to catch people off guard. The number of people who reach 85 while still sharp, still mobile, still fully independent is shockingly small. Depending on the population studied, only a fraction of people in this age range are what researchers quietly refer to as successful agers. The rest are dealing with some combination of memory loss, frailty, chronic illness, or a growing dependence on others for the basic tasks of daily life. That is not meant as a guilt trip. It is simply what the data shows, which is exactly why the ones who are still vibrant, still curious, still steady on their feet, are so remarkable. If you know someone like this, or if you suspect you might be becoming someone like this yourself, stay with me. Because there are 6 specific things that keep showing up, again and again, in the lives of people who age this well. Not once in a while. Not as a coincidence. Consistently, across different countries, different income levels, different backgrounds. And by the end of this, you will understand exactly why these 6 things matter so much more than almost anything else people obsess over when it comes to getting older. What makes this list so strange is how little it resembles the anti-aging advice most of us have been fed for years. There is no mention of expensive skincare, no mention of hormone replacement clinics, no mention of the latest trending pill promising to add a decade to your life. When you actually sit across from people in their 80s who still move like they mean it, still remember your name from the first time they met you, and still have opinions about the news that morning, the pattern that emerges is almost embarrassingly human. It is not exotic, it is not complicated, but it is also not automatic, which is exactly why so few people end up living it out consistently enough for it to matter. So let's go through all 6, one at a time, starting with the one that trips up almost everyone who thinks they already understand it. Let's start with the one that surprises almost everyone, because it has nothing to do with exercise in the way most people picture it. It is movement, yes, but not the gym membership, treadmill 3 times a week kind of movement. The people who are still vibrant at 75, 80, 85 are almost never people who go all out on a machine for 45 minutes and then sit motionless for the remaining 23 hours of the day. What actually separates them is something far less dramatic. Researchers sometimes call it non-exercise movement, and it sounds almost too simple to matter. They get up to answer the door instead of shouting from the couch. They walk to the mailbox instead of driving to it. They garden on their hands and knees. They do their own grocery shopping and carry the bags themselves. They stand while they talk on the phone instead of sitting for the entire call. It adds up to something that looks less like a fitness routine and more like a life that simply refuses to sit still for very long. There is a real biological reason this matters more than a single scheduled workout does. Every time you stand up, every time your legs push you off a chair, every time you carry something heavier than a coffee cup, your blood vessels respond. They dilate. Blood flow increases to your muscles, your brain, your organs, even if only for a few minutes. And this is where vascular health enters the picture, one of the most overlooked pieces of the entire aging puzzle. Your body is threaded with an almost unbelievable network of blood vessels, and how well that network functions, how easily it dilates, how efficiently it clears out debris, how well new capillaries form when tissue needs them, has an enormous influence on how your organs age over time. People who move constantly throughout the day in small, unglamorous ways keep that vascular network active almost continuously. People who move only once, in a single planned burst, and then sit motionless for hours afterward, simply do not get the same benefit, even if the total step count on their phone looks similar by the end of the day. So the first thing these remarkable 75 to 85-year-olds have in common is not a gym schedule at all. It is restlessness. A quiet, almost stubborn refusal to let their body go completely still for long stretches at a time. The second thing is going to sound almost too ordinary to be worth mentioning, and that is exactly why most people overlook it. It is their relationship with food, but not in the calorie-counting diet culture sense most people immediately picture. The people who age remarkably well tend to eat real food, prepared simply most of the time. Vegetables that still look like vegetables. Fruit instead of fruit juice. Fish, legumes, olive oil, nuts, whole grains. Not because someone handed them a strict meal plan at some point, but because that is simply what eating has always meant to them, going back decades. Here is where it becomes genuinely interesting. There is a growing body of research on angiogenesis, the process by which your body grows new blood vessels, and it turns out this process is either quietly helping you or quietly working against you depending heavily on what ends up on your plate. Certain foods, things like green tea, tomatoes, dark leafy greens, berries, and extra virgin olive oil, contain natural compounds that appear to help regulate blood vessel growth in a healthy direction, supporting normal tissue while helping to starve out the kind of disorganized vessel growth that has been linked to disease progression. Other foods, particularly heavily processed ones loaded with refined sugar and industrial oils, seem to nudge that same system in the opposite direction. And to be clear, this is not about eating with monk-like discipline. The remarkable 80-year-olds researchers study are not people who never touch cake at a birthday party or never order dessert. What actually sets them apart is consistency. Their baseline, the thing they eat on a random, unremarkable Tuesday when nobody is watching and there is no special occasion, is real food. And that baseline, repeated quietly across tens of thousands of ordinary days, is what genuinely shapes how their bodies age over the long run. The third thing might be the most quietly powerful item on this entire list, and it has almost nothing to do with medicine at all. It is connection. Specifically, the number of people these individuals talk to, laugh with, and feel genuinely close to on a regular, ongoing basis. This is not a soft, feel-good add-on tacked onto the end of a health list. Multiple large studies tracking older adults over years have found that chronic social isolation carries a mortality risk that researchers have compared to smoking or obesity. Let that sit for a moment. Loneliness is not just an unpleasant feeling. It appears to be measurably dangerous, activating many of the same stress pathways in the body that chronic disease activates, keeping inflammation elevated for longer periods, and gradually wearing down immune function over time. The people who are still sharp and vibrant at 75, 80, 85 are almost never isolated. They have a weekly card game with the same 3 friends they have known for 20 years, a standing phone call with a grandchild every Sunday evening, a neighbor they check in on, or who checks in on them, a group at church, or the community center, or the local dog park that they genuinely belong to and would be missed from if they stopped showing up. It does not need to be an enormous social circle. In fact, the research suggests quality matters far more than quantity here. A small handful of relationships where a person truly feels seen, needed, and valued does more for their long-term health than 100 surface-level acquaintances ever could. And what is happening underneath this is not purely emotional either. When people feel connected and needed, they tend to eat better, move more, take their medications more consistently, and recover faster from illness or injury, simply because they have both the motivation and the support system to do it. Isolation, quietly and without anyone noticing at first, tends to strip away all of those protective behaviors at once. Now, before we get to the fourth thing, it is worth pausing on something that ties the first 3 together, because it is easy to miss. Movement, food, and connection are not 3 separate habits operating in isolation. They feed into each other. The person who walks to the market instead of driving is also more likely to run into a neighbor and stop for a conversation. The person who cooks a real meal is more likely to invite someone over to share it. In the lives of people aging remarkably well, these things rarely exist as isolated checkboxes on a wellness list. They are woven together into an entire way of moving through the world. Keep that in mind as we move into the next 3, because the pattern only gets more interesting from here. The fourth thing is one that a lot of people assume fades naturally with age, and for many people it does, but not for this particular group. It is curiosity. Specifically, an ongoing hunger to keep learning something new, in almost any form, not necessarily in a formal classroom sense, although some of them absolutely do take community college classes or join book clubs that meet every other week. It shows up more in the sense of never quite feeling finished with learning. They pick up a new hobby in their 70s, just for the challenge of it. They learn to use a smartphone, however reluctantly, and with a fair amount of grumbling at first. They ask questions about things they genuinely do not understand instead of dismissing them outright. They read constantly. They do crossword puzzles or jigsaw puzzles, not because a doctor told them to, but because they truly enjoy the mental friction of figuring something out piece by piece. This matters because your brain, much like your muscles, responds to demand. Neuroscientists studying cognitive resilience in older adults have found that people who continue challenging their brains with novel, effortful tasks tend to build something researchers refer to as cognitive reserve. Think of it as a kind of buffer, an extra layer of protection. Even when some of the underlying biological changes associated with aging are quietly present in the brain, people with higher cognitive reserve often show far fewer outward symptoms because their brains have built extra pathways and connections over the decades that can compensate when needed. It is not that learning a new language at 78 magically prevents every possible form of decline. It is that a brain accustomed to being challenged tends to be far more resilient when real challenges eventually arrive, whether that challenge is an illness, a loss, or simply the ordinary wear of time passing. The fifth thing is the one people are most likely to brush off as unimportant, and it might genuinely be the most dangerous thing on this entire list to ignore. It is sleep. Real, consistent, high-quality sleep. Not the kind where you are technically lying in bed for 8 hours but tossing, turning, waking up at 3 a.m. and staring at the ceiling, and then dragging yourself through the next day running on caffeine and sheer willpower. The people who are aging remarkably well tend to have protected, almost sacred sleep routines that they rarely compromise on. They go to bed and wake up around the same time, day after day, whether it is a weekday or a weekend. They do not treat sleep as something to sacrifice for one more episode of a show or one more scroll through their phone in the dark. The reason this matters so much becomes clearer when you look at what actually happens inside the body during deep sleep. This is when the brain runs what researchers describe as its own cleaning cycle, flushing out metabolic waste products that build up steadily during waking hours, including certain proteins that have been linked to cognitive decline when they are allowed to accumulate unchecked over long periods. It is also when the body carries out the bulk of its tissue repair, immune system recalibration, and hormone regulation for the day. Chronic poor sleep in older adults has been associated in multiple studies with higher rates of cardiovascular disease, weakened immune response, and faster cognitive decline over time. The remarkable 75 to 85-year-olds researchers study are not sleeping well, simply because they have nothing better to do with their evenings. They are sleeping well because, whether they consciously realize it or not, they have protected one of the single most powerful repair systems the human body has ever developed. It is worth noting that sleep tends to change naturally with age, becoming lighter and more fragmented for almost everyone, which is exactly why the people who protect it deliberately stand out so clearly from the rest. They are not fighting a losing battle against biology. They are simply refusing to make an already difficult situation worse by staying up late scrolling, drinking caffeine into the afternoon, or treating a consistent bedtime as optional. Small, boring choices, repeated for decades, quietly add up to one of the biggest differences between the people who stay sharp into their 80s and the people who do not. And now the sixth thing, the one that quietly ties every other item on this list together. It is purpose. A genuine reason to get out of bed each morning that has nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with meaning. This is the piece that researchers studying some of the world's longest-lived populations keep circling back to over and over, no matter which country or culture they happen to be studying. In Okinawa, there is a specific word for it, ikigai, loosely translated as the reason you wake up in the morning. In other long-lived communities scattered around the world, it shows up in different forms. Tending a garden the whole family quietly depends on, mentoring younger relatives through difficult decisions, continuing meaningful work well past traditional retirement age, or staying deeply involved in a faith community or a cause they genuinely care about. The people who are still vibrant at 85 almost always have something like this anchoring their days. It might be small in scope. It might be tending grandchildren twice a week, or restoring old furniture in the garage, or volunteering at a local animal shelter every Thursday morning. But it is never passive. It is never simply watching life happen around them from a chair by the window. There is a striking body of research on retirement and health that consistently finds people who leave meaningful work or roles without replacing that sense of purpose with something else tend to show faster physical and cognitive decline than those who stay actively engaged, even when their financial situation and baseline health are otherwise nearly identical. Purpose appears to do something that no supplement, no medication, and no amount of willpower alone can fully replicate. It gives the nervous system a genuine reason to stay alert. It gives the immune system a reason to stay resilient. And it gives the whole person a reason to keep showing up, fully, for their own life, one ordinary morning at a time. So here is the full picture that emerges once you put all 6 of these things side by side. Constant, unglamorous movement woven throughout the entire day. A baseline diet built on real, whole foods rather than any kind of forced perfection. Genuine, ongoing connection with other people who would actually notice if they disappeared. A hunger to keep learning that never quite switches off, even decades into retirement. Sleep that is treated as completely non-negotiable, not as something to trade away. And a sense of purpose that pulls them out of bed every single morning, not because they have to, but because some part of them genuinely wants to. None of these 6 things require money most people do not have. None of them require a level of discipline that only a rare handful of people could ever sustain over decades. What they actually require is something both simpler and, in its own way, much harder. A quiet refusal to check out of life early. The people who are truly one of a kind at 75, 80, 85 did not arrive there by accident, and they did not get there through some secret that only a handful of specialists know about. They got there by staying engaged with their own bodies, their own minds, their own relationships, and their own sense of purpose, day after day, for decades on end, long before anyone was watching or keeping score. There is one more thing worth saying before we close this out, because it is easy to hear a list like this and feel like the window has already closed. It has not. Researchers who study aging populations consistently find that people who adopt even 1 or 2 of these habits later in life, in their 60s, their 70s, sometimes even their early 80s, still see meaningful improvements in how they feel, how they move, and how sharp their thinking stays. The body does not require a lifetime of perfect habits to start responding. It responds to what you do this week, this month, this year. Starting late is still starting. And starting is still, by a wide margin, better than not starting at all. Think about the people in your own life right now who are somewhere in that 75 to 85 range. Picture the ones who still light up a room, who still ask you questions about your life instead of only talking about their own, who still seem, somehow, more alive than people half their age. Chances are, if you look closely enough, you will find several of these 6 things quietly running underneath their daily routine, so ingrained into how they live that they probably could not even explain it to you if you asked. That is often how the healthiest habits work. They stop looking like habits at all. They just become who a person is. If you recognize someone you love in this list while listening, or if you recognized pieces of yourself, that is not a small thing at all. That is essentially the blueprint. And if none of these 6 things feel true for you just yet, here is the genuinely encouraging part of all this research. It is rarely, if ever, too late to start building even one of them, one small and unglamorous habit at a time. If this gave you something to think about, hit subscribe, because there is a lot more research-backed insight like this coming, and you will not want to miss it.